I need to make a quick disclaimer right here. This is going to be a very heavy video. This is going to be a very rough video. This is going to be a video that delves into a lot of very, very dark subjects. This is not going to be a video where I make a lot of jokes, because a lot of what has happened needs to be documented, it needs to be seen, it needs to be taken very, very seriously. Everything that I have got right here is public, and it is known information. And all of it discusses the drama surrounding Emi Jones and Ryan Drummond. This is a video that has taken a very long time, and it's a very difficult one to discuss because there is just so much information surrounding this whole ordeal. And what made it so hard to make this video and even to keep it out there was just what kind of person Emi Jones is. And unfortunately, the main focus when it came to talk around Emi Jones was the affair between her and Ryan Drummond. Now, I need to get this out of the way. Ryan Drummond was married when the affair happened. Emi Jones was well aware that Ryan Drummond was married at the time. All evidence shows that the affair happened in 2016. All documents talking about Ryan Drummond's divorce were all finalized in 2019. We can indeed confirm that yes, this account was Emi's, and yes, Ryan did do the voice. And it's confirmed that Emi Jones didn't care how her inserting herself into Ryan Drummond's family life affected Ryan's family until years later when it came back to bite her in the ass. And given the evidence that we have, it's almost certain that Emi Jones is the reason Ryan Drummond is divorced in the first place. Now, as has been pointed out by other YouTubers, Emi Jones had to use the affair as a smokescreen. So a lot of what I just told you was left out of her response because Emi Jones at the time was swimming in controversy, and there was a lot of awful things that she had done that had just come to light. So when she mentioned the affair as if it was just two adults going at it, it doesn't sound as bad as someone ruining someone else's family life. And believe me when I say this affair isn't even the worst thing she's done. Now, one of the main controversies that Emi Jones was trying to cover up at the time was the controversy surrounding Sonic and Tails R, because the controversy around that was really starting to grow at the time. Most of it revolved around whether or not Mike Pollock was even paid for his work or not, and whether or not he was lied to so he would do the project. In fact, the situation got so bad that Mike Pollock himself had to come out and explain what happened between him and the staff on Sonic and Tails R, just so things didn't escalate. But thanks to this controversy, it's safe to say that Sonic and Tails R is probably cancelled by now. Emi and Ryan's reputation is now in a pretty bad state, and it's very unlikely they'll find any help to help finish the project. It also didn't help that Emi Jones herself was partially responsible for spreading misinformation, and this was only exacerbated by her fandom. And in order to understand how her fandom plays a role in all of this, you have to understand the very unhealthy parasocial relationship between Emi, her fandom, and her friends. Emi Jones definitely has a very dedicated fanbase, and it's one that holds no bars into how far they're willing to help her. A huge part of this parasocial relationship comes down to the victimhood narrative that Emi Jones has built around herself, mostly involving her own mental health. And these problems, usually crippling depression, are the subject of several GoFundMes, usually of $6,000 or more. Now, on the surface, this isn't a problem. Crippling depression can hurt or destroy someone's lives, because it usually is so severe that you can't even get out of bed. But when you look at Emi Jones's donations and their timeline, something doesn't add up. Because within the week of any of these donation pools being reached, Emi is usually on vacation, and it can range from trips to Disney World to trips all the way to a con in Tokyo. These can cost upwards of thousands of dollars, and that's not even counting the passport that you have to get in order to travel that far. If you need to get a good therapist, normally they're only about $105 per visit. You don't generally need $6,000. In a situation like that, that's overkill. Now, take for example someone like Frank Amadeo, a successful billionaire. Frank would have these depressive episodes which would cripple him so badly that he couldn't even get out of bed, and because he couldn't get out of bed and his businesses were reliant on his work ethic, his businesses would collapse and he'd have to start from scratch all over again. This isn't something that we see with Emi Jones. Quite the opposite, actually. Now, Emi tries to heavily emphasize how serious all of this stuff is, but the story surrounding her anxiety and depression keeps changing back and forth, and sometimes it's some other disease that no one's ever even heard of. One minute, she supposedly says that she has anxiety because there hasn't been a good Sonic game in 10 years, and then another minute, she's saying something like depression has been cured just because Martin Ray appeared in Sonic Mania. And in 2020, she claimed that she had contracted a heart condition. And despite how serious something like this is, she refused to get treatment until her friends begged her to do so. But suspiciously, she came out within a few days wearing a Zeo monitor, which is inadequate to detect if there's a heart condition or not. Now, normally in a situation like this, you wouldn't be in there for a few days, you'd be in there for over a week at least. And on top of that, they wouldn't be giving you a Zeo monitor, you'd be given a Holter monitor. A Holter monitor is far more accurate in determining whether or not someone has something like an aneurysm or a deformed heart. A Zeo monitor simply won't do that. In fact, Zeo monitors are so easy to obtain that you could easily get one at the gym even. It's only really used to measure your heart rate, and not much else. Now, people have asked Emi how she's able to afford all these expensive trips, given that most of these GoFundMes are supposed to go towards therapy and paying for her bills and whatnot. Emi Jones never answered any of these questions. Instead, she responded by saying, and I quote, "That tweet was sarcastic. It's called a joke. Maybe if you didn't take video games so seriously, sarcastic tweets wouldn't be such a foreign language to you. And how I can afford anything or my depression is none of your business. Feel free to catch this block, though." And this is how she handled the whole controversy with BetterHelp. For a while, Emi Jones was sponsoring BetterHelp, and people politely asked her whether or not she was aware of the controversy surrounding BetterHelp, where they were giving confidential user data to Facebook. Emi Jones covered her tracks and acted like nothing happened. So with all of this in mind, it's very likely that Emi Jones has been scamming her fandom for the last couple of years. But even if she isn't scamming her fandom, her behavior doesn't help these accusations at all. And this also does not paint a very pretty picture about Emi Jones' character either. And you would think that Emi would have at least some sympathy for people in her own shoes, but this isn't the case. Emi Jones has gone on record saying, "Jealous of attention? She feels she should be getting attention for beating cancer when I'm just a pretty cosplayer." Now, while Emi and her fans have claimed that she was being harassed by this cancer victim, there's no source for it beyond her own fandom. And we can't take her fans' words for them because she's told people to lie to people like Starman Mars in order to protect her own image, making even her own fans, who could be potential witnesses, an unreliable source. So all I can go off of is what I am seeing, and what I am seeing here is someone who is very inconsiderate, very selfish, and that's on top of her threatening to hold her own life hostage to a couple of her friends after getting called out. And then she told them she was going to go to a mental hospital, but that never happened. She was on social media the whole time. That is a far cry from the sweet, lovable Christian girl that her and her fans have painted her as. To get a better idea of how toxic Emi Jones can be, we need to start looking at her work ethic. For starters, years back, Jesse Pajamas made a video talking about his work with Emi. Emi had commissioned him to make some music and gave him the prompt, "It has to be good," which didn't really give Jesse much to work with. Later, Jesse had a rough idea of what he wanted to make with it, and he sent the beta to Emi Jones. The problem is that it was a beta. Emi Jones wanted it then and now, and she started getting aggressive with him, but he tried to explain to her that it wasn't ready yet. And by the time he came to submit a finished version, Emi Jones had already uploaded the video anyways. Now, it is worth mentioning that despite this, Jesse Pajamas did not have a negative view of Emi Jones, and the two would later hang out together. I even emailed Jesse to confirm a couple of things, but he hasn't gotten back to me. If he does, I will give y'all an update on that. We also have the word of Javico and his friends to go off of, since a lot of them also worked with Emi Jones, and a lot of them had a lot of trouble working with Emi Jones just because of her diva attitude. And another good point that Javico brings up in his video is that Emi Jones basically just does whatever she wants. And we know this because she's been caught leaking things from Sega, even though she is still affiliated with Sega. And it doesn't help that the affair was an open secret that everybody knew about, but nobody was allowed to talk about it either. because a lot of big names that knew Emi were trying to keep that whole thing under wraps, so a lot of people weren't allowed to talk about it. And so because of this, Emi Jones was effectively emboldened to do whatever she wanted without consequence. And it also doesn't help that Emi Jones got caught ripping someone's music off of a CD and then posting it onto her channel, breaking both copyright and fair use laws by potentially profiting off of it. And to further complicate matters, she has a habit of hoarding her voice actors out, for really no reason or benefit for herself. Many years ago, a friend of mine contacted Emi trying to get in contact with one of the voice actors who used to work with Sega, because one of his former co-workers was trying to get in contact with him as well for a project. The thing is, Emi Jones acted aggressively and acted like this was some kind of breach of privacy, even though these emails were out there in the open for people to contact them. However, years later, this voice actor did do the project, and he did record a couple of voice lines, and he was perfectly happy to do so. So why Emi Jones has to hoard her voice actors, or the voice actors that she has contact with, I have no idea. But this does reinforce her diva attitude and mindset, where it's her way or the highway, whether anyone likes it or not. And if you didn't feel that Emi Jones thought she could get away with doing whatever the hell she wanted, there is a point where she literally stole someone's artwork, used it to get 8,000 followers, and she parasitized off of it as much as she could. The original artist received no payment and was not credited at all, and the whole situation almost caused them to end it all. Which means Emi Jones herself almost ended up with a body count. This is why people don't like working with Emi Jones. If she wants to get onto a project, she has to brute force her way in, and normally she does this by sleeping with whoever she can get her hands on. This is what ended up happening with Wrath of Nazo. Originally, the project starred Spirit of the Blue as Sonic, and his best friend Blue-Eyed Fox was voicing Tails. Emi wanted in on this project because she had a thing for Spirit of the Blue, and she wasn't exactly happy that somebody else was voicing Tails, no less this person's best friend. So Emi slept with Spirit of the Blue so she could replace Blue-Eyed Fox. After they had recorded all of their lines and everything was ready to be animated. And then Emi Jones began harassing other members on the project, and to make matters worse, they didn't even credit Blue-Eyed Fox for originally voicing Tails. And then, after Blue-Eyed Fox complained, Emi began stalking her on her Twitter to write a whole blog slandering her, even though she had every right to be mad about it. In the end, they ended up using completely different voice actors altogether. And she doesn't have to necessarily get in bed with the person either to get what she wants. Matt Mannheimer has been sipping for her for years and getting her into contact with a lot of people in the fandom in the hopes that maybe he'll get a piece of that action. The thing is that he hasn't. He's still a virgin, and honestly, Emi Jones doesn't owe him anything either. But this just goes to show that Emi Jones isn't wanted for her talent, she's wanted more so for her experience. Now, remember I said earlier about Emi Jones stalking Blue-Eyed Fox? Yeah, Emi Jones isn't your standard OnlyFans user. Her and her fanbase are bloodthirsty. If you say anything negative about Emi Jones, they're gonna make you pay. And they don't care how far they're willing to take it. Blue-Eyed Fox found out that a guy named Radioactive was being ordered to attack her by Emi Jones on her Dark account, and when Emi found out that this got leaked, she immediately began cleansing her account to try to find out who the rat was. And she's not Emi's only victim either. It's a known fact that Emi's fans have ratted people out for even the most minor of offenses towards her. This is what happened to a friend of mine, True Blue Fuse, when he made a video called Unknown from Emi, which was a parody of Unknown from ME. And Emi and her friends were all too happy to throw around all these false accusations left and right, even though it was simply a joke. And the friend of mine that tried to contact Emi also had the same fate when he said some things about Emi Jones on Twitter, which Emi Jones then twisted after someone ratted him out to her. Now, credit where credit is due, they did eventually work things out, and this is why I had to censor both of their names, but this kind of thing should not be happening. Ricardo from Speed Supercell was another victim of hers, and he did absolutely nothing. He had never interacted with her, online or IRL, and yet for some reason she accused him of stalking her, and then tried to have him blacklisted unfairly from Sonic Revolution. And not only did she try to have him blacklisted from Sonic Revolution, She straight up tried to sabotage his career for no reason. Ricardo was only at Sonic Revolution to meet up with his fans, and yet despite that, he was aggressively approached by staff and was told to leave. And when they were confronted about it, they themselves admitted they didn't know why, other than that Emi Jones told them to get rid of him. Dylan Thomas, before he got caught up in all the controversy that ruined his career, was also a victim of Emi Jones. This time, Dylan was as nice as he could be to her. He even went out of his way to attack people that Emi Jones did not like. He defended her, and he complimented the hell out of her. And yet, despite that, Emi Jones tried to have his channel shut down because she did not want him talking about an episode of Dr. Phil. And coincidentally, this is one of the few Dr. Phil episodes that has comments turned off. Now, keep in mind, Dylan was specifically warned not to defend Emi Jones, and it almost cost him everything. And the guy that tried to warn Dylan was the same guy that brought up how Emi Jones could afford all these expensive trips, while at the same time suffering from severe anxiety and depression. Emi's friends and her fans went after this guy, and despite blocking him, Emi Jones went on a very, very long smear campaign to ruin this guy's public image. This is also how Emi Jones handled the criticism for Sonic and Tails R. Unfortunately, the poster child for this ended up being an artist named McMistletoe. McMistletoe ultimately criticized the work for not being what it was advertised as, and for having some of the worst voice acting that she had ever seen in a Sonic the Hedgehog story. And Emi Jones not only took an offense to this, but she told her fans all about it, feigned ignorance, and what made it even worse is that even the voice actors were ganging up on Mistletoe. And they had some pretty nasty things to say to her. It was bad. It was so bad, in fact, that Dumzil had to make a video so Emi Jones would apologize and so this whole thing could stop. It was bad. Unfortunately, she wasn't the only critic that Emi Jones went after at this time, but she ultimately was the one that got the most attention. I myself have been on the receiving end of what Emi Jones has to offer. There was a bunch of people who were going after someone because they said that a kid was not owed a PS5. They threatened to violently punch a hole in somebody over a PS5, and then Emi Jones and her fans get involved. And by this point, I am very, very pissed. And I said, I'm sure that all those unalive children from your womb are really going to enjoy that bubblegum world you live in. And when Emi Jones got into the conversation, her fans followed in, and they tore me to shreds with some of the most heinous things you could think of. They quite literally said, and I quote, "Not gonna lie, you seem like a good endorsement for pro-choice." And here's what Emi Jones had to say about the attention I was receiving. Someone has to give it to him. Certainly wasn't his parents. Now, I'm not going to defend what I said. What I said was messed up. But look at these tweets and notice the difference between how they treated Mistletoe and how they treated me. There is very little difference in how they treat people that criticize Emi Jones versus people that say things like that. The only major difference is that they will admit that they want you snuffed out in the womb. And remember, all of that was over a PS5. And you might think to just wait it out and wait for things to blow over. That's not a guarantee with Emi Jones. Emi Jones is incredibly envious and incredibly wrathful. That cancer victim I mentioned earlier was supposed to meet up with Ryan Drummond during a convention. Emi Jones was very jealous of this person and went out of her way to sabotage the meetup. And when people called her out, she pitched a fit. The person she wronged called her out and then blocked her. And Emi decided that there was going to be hell to pay. The first thing that Emi Jones did was sabotage any contact between Sega and the victim. Then she sent all of her fans to harass this person on Facebook, Twitter, Comic Fury. Anywhere where this person is online, they were getting sent death threat after death threat, and they even told her to go Ann Hero at one point. It did not matter if the project had no association or anything to do with Emi Jones whatsoever, they went out of their way to harass this person for blocking Emi Jones. And this screenshot right here should tell you all you need to know about the mindset that you fucked with the wrong person and you're gonna pay. But it doesn't stop there, because Emi Jones lied to the voice actors that the victim was trying to take her out. This left the victim even more helpless than she already was, and put her at the mercy of Emi Jones using her as a scapegoat. And even after all of this, Emi is still not satisfied, because Emi decided that she needed to insert herself and her friends into the lives of the victim's friends. This involved befriending them before either shaming them or threatening to ostracize them because they followed the victim. Emi and her friends did both to Polly B, and yet despite having been threatened and shamed for something that he had no control over, and all the support and friendship from the victim, Polly B still blocked the victim. Having now basically ruined this person's life, supposedly afterwards, Emi Jones was being harassed day in and day out. According to Emi, she was also swatted. Emi Jones and her fans and friends in the Discord apparently got a hold of the phone number of the victim from the police, and then claimed that she was going after her child after the fire department came to take the child away. Eventually, Emi Jones started a GoFundMe to take the matter to court, where she got a temporary restraining order, hoping to get a full-blown restraining order. And here's where things go off the rails. The court transcript reads only 16 pages. And in these 16 pages, Emi Jones not only brought evidence to court that showed that she was the one that called the police to her house, not the victim, but because Emi and her friends were going out to get the person's phone number and claimed that they got it from the police, this led to the victim calling the police department to confirm whether or not they had her phone number. The answer is that they didn't. And the further confusion came in when the child was brought up. The victim had no idea that there was even a child involved in the first place, and because of this ordeal, the police got the fire department involved, and that's why they showed up at Emi Jones's house. In the end, the court ended up ruling in favor of the victim because they couldn't find substantial evidence that somebody in California was under threat from somebody in Texas. And despite losing the court case, Emi Jones has continued to make these same claims over and over and over again. On top of that, Emi Jones is still calling the police to her house, which puts her at risk of being kicked out of her apartment. Whether or not this has had any effect on her housing situation yet, I cannot say. What I can say for certain is that all of this paints Emi Jones as being a very, very petty person. And being friends with Emi Jones also does not protect you from her wrath. Now, you would think somebody like Trey Nobles, who has spent years defending Emi and has been on her side on every point, would be free from this kind of thing. But Trey and Emi ended up in an argument about whether or not trans women should compete in women's sports. Now, Trey's answer to this is saying, "I'm really begging all of you to practice restraint. You really don't need to reply to every single argument that you don't agree with, especially about fictional media." Emi Jones's response is, "Trey, while normally we are best friends, you have posted a take and/or opinion that I don't agree with, and I need you to know that temporarily your friendship rights have been revoked, because I must defend my own opinions against you, so my opinion is the correct one." Now, what Trey is saying isn't irrational by any means. It is not hostile by any means. He's not meaning it as offense to Emi. And in a normal friendship, they would talk about these things, but Emi quite literally tells him, "I am going to revoke your friendship privileges," which is not something most people would do. The messed up part is that Emi Jones went out of her way to defend Jugga Conroy, despite the overwhelming evidence that he was taking advantage of a 15-year-old for his own personal interests. Emi Jones quite literally argued, and I quote, "Even with autism, You can't just learn not to mail someone shoes and then ask them for feet pics. All this really goes to show is how fragile Emi Jones's friendships are. They can be cut off at the simplest point, or she can hold her ground for somebody who she really shouldn't be just because she gets some benefit out of it. And if she doesn't want to be friends with you, it can be over the most petty of things. In fact, even her statements revolving Chugga shows she does not have a very high regard for people with autism. But for a lot of people, that doesn't matter, because they're only friends with Emi Jones because they get some kind of benefit out of it themselves. And 4 of the people that come to my mind are Sisconic, formerly Megapie Central, Dylan Thomas, Gamerguide 7 Aces, and Lord Danny. The first 3 being of particular interest because previously Megapie was one of Emi Jones's victims, as was Dylan Thomas. Of course, this came much later. Eventually, all 3 of these men decided that they were going to take Emi Jones down, and the 3 of them found evidence that Emi Jones had a mommy toy that she was leaving around where her daughter could potentially get to it. This was given to me by Cisco and a former associate of his. What becomes very apparent when looking at these screenshots is that both Cisco and Dylan do not support Emi's behavior. It also makes it very apparent that these 3 men thought that the mommy toys incident was illegal, and for some reason, they never bothered to contact the authorities. All of this eventually went out of the window when both of them tried to befriend Emi. Cisco was successful in this regard. As he stated, it would not be in his best interest to screw Emi Jones over, and the reason for that is because Emi is the main reason for his continued relevance. Without her, his channel would not survive. And Dylan, after his attempt to slander Jesse Pajamas backfired, tried to get on Emi's good side. However, he later deleted the video, but you definitely notice a pattern that both of these men were willing to throw all of their morals out the window if it meant making their channels profitable. In Gamerguide's case, it was very easy to drop the whole scenario and act like nothing ever happened. And given it's a better idea to have more friends than enemies, this definitely makes sense. As for Danny, this was a one-time incident. The reason she got involved was because I had made a video exposing one of her friends because they were trying to bully a friend of mine for clout. And because of that, Danny and her friends held a grudge for 2 years. And the moment Emi Jones went after me, they saw that as an opportunity to get revenge. And Danny was one of the people that made it very clear they thought I should have been used for stem cell research. So all of her talk about how you shouldn't wish death upon people because they disagree with you, or the awful things Emi Jones did to McMistletoe, who is Danny's friend, mind you, apparently all of that didn't matter anymore, just so she could get petty revenge for one day. All of this is what led to Emi Jones's increasingly negative reputation. And while she still maintains a relatively positive image within the Sonic fandom, Emi Jones does not often talk about her time in the MLP fandom. And this is down to a set of several increasingly poor decisions. The first thing I have to talk about is her breakup with Solrak and G. These two found themselves in an increasingly toxic relationship which neither of their parents supported. The problem, as Solrak explained, was that Emi Jones was unwilling to compromise, and so because of that, he had to be a step-parent and agree with everything she said unconditionally. The problem is that this made things worse, causing a lot of financial and emotional problems for both parties. And in the end, Solrak found out that he just wasn't cut out to be a parent yet. So he wrote an open letter to Emi Jones explaining that he just couldn't continue with it anymore because it was too toxic. He didn't want to leave things on a negative light with her and decided it would be better to cut off the relationship just because he wanted to remain friends so he could continue his career and so she could find a better man capable of actually taking care of her child. Emi began pitching a fit about this, and her main concern was that he just wouldn't be a parent and that she was going to have to be a single mother. She ended up sending a ton of her fans to harass Solrak, and yet despite all of this, he still did not hold any ill will towards Emi. Of course, by this point, the drama had already gained a lot of traction, with the incident being reported on by a My Little Pony fan site called Horse.org, where they mercilessly ridiculed Emi and her fans because she kept taking financial advantage of them and using them to harass people online. So at this point, Emi Jones finds out about the article, and then her fans get involved and start harassing and spamming people on the website, causing them to start ridiculing her even more. And this kept going and going to the point where they actually ended up mentioning Emi Jones again out of sheer ridicule. In fact, they even had to censor the name of the author so they wouldn't get harassed themselves. And it's because of stuff like this that Emi Jones ended up being known in the MLP fandom as nothing more than a bully and a thug. And that's alongside her reputation as a backstreet girl and a bad mother being so well known in this fandom that apparently people are just talking about it openly, with the final nail in the coffin being her association with Animated James and Toon Critic Y2K, two men who, let's just say, had a similar interest in women to Jared Fogle. But these sort of antics go back even further, as far back as 2009. This is around the same time Emi Jones had her sights set on Sierra Entertainment. For those of you who don't know, Sierra Entertainment are the original publishers behind Half-Life, Team Fortress Classic, Frogger, Spyro, and Crash. So these guys have a pretty sizable catalog and a huge pedigree. And this is where Steven Sayers comes in. Sayers is someone who worked with Sierra from 2001 to 2007. He eventually left to pursue a career in law enforcement. However, he continued to work with Sierra as a consultant on the SWAT series. So in 2009, Emi Jones was referred to Sayers by a man going by the name Tom. And according to Sayers, Emi Jones said that she was 21 and that she was looking to party and have intercourse. She was hoping that Sayers would be willing to fly from Indiana to Ohio so she could get pregnant and to secure her position at Sierra. Her plan didn't work out for several reasons. For starters, nobody at Sierra Entertainment liked her. Sayers himself even went on to say that she was as cutthroat as they came, and that not only did she have a lot of practice by that point, but that she was all used up. And because Sayers is a police officer, he immediately told Emi that if she didn't leave him alone, he would start pressing charges. Now, some parts of this are a bit hazy. When Emi contacted Sayers on Snapchat, she told him she was only 21. However, this is impossible given that she wasn't a mother yet, and by the time she was on Dr. Phil, she was only 16. And initially, Sayers does say 2009 from memory, but then when he hears the age, he assumes that it's probably around 2013. And while Emi Jones denies having met Sayers, she does confirm that this meetup would have happened in 2009, which does line up with what Sayers is initially saying. We also know that this is the same Emi Jones because he mentions her work at Sega and how she got into Sega, much like how she tried to get into Sierra. So we can confirm that the Emi Jones Sayers talked to and the one that's working at Sega are the same person. Unfortunately, with the given date being most likely 2009, this also has some fairly disturbing implications. And this is where everything finally comes to a head. Emi had thrown her own best friend Ceci under the bus in favor of Doryan Nelson, and there were a lot, and I mean a lot, of bad things that Doryan did. And what this document shows is a lot of the same behavior that I show in this video. It's a lot, and it's very disturbing. I will have screenshots of the document in the background as I try to explain the document to the best of my ability. Before Sonic Fan Jam 2017, Ceci had gone through a breakup with her boyfriend, now husband, Mr. Pascal. As a result, she became much more reclusive during the event. Ceci had stayed behind with Doryan Nelson after declining some time with Emi Jones, having not felt up to leave the hotel room. So she stayed with Doryan, and after a night at Denny's with their group, Ceci told Doryan that she was going to sleep. Ceci woke up in the middle of the night, and Doryan, without consent, was in the bed with her holding Ceci in his arms. Now, Ceci thought that she had a nightmare, so she thought Doryan was comforting her. What Doryan was actually doing was spooning her. He was fully awake, as shown in his apology, while Ceci was not, and after waking up, Doryan said to Ceci, "I really like you, Ceci," and ran his hand through her hair. Thing is, Ceci did not consent to any of this, and Doryan was laughing at this as if it was some kind of a joke. Ceci finally got fed up with him and told him to go to bed. As soon as Ceci was able to get out of Doryan's arms, she turned on the shower to calm herself down and eventually started crying. The next thing Ceci did was contact Emi and tell her she had to talk with her later. Ceci had previously been taken advantage of and grabbed in a similar manner and ended up leaving the room, staying with one of her friends. This ordeal greatly affected Ceci's performance during the event, and when she confronted Emi about it, Emi was very angry about the situation. Emi phrased it like he had similarly done so to her without her consent, but Emi basically painted as if she was standing up for Ceci when that wasn't the case, and this ended up being used to shame Ceci for saying anything about Doryan. Doryan was using Emi in the same way that Emi was using Drummond and taking advantage of Ceci to fill the hole left behind by his ex. And Emi was more than willing to bully Cess to make sure Doryan was still on the team. After the con, they had abandoned Cess that night and left her to be harassed at her friend's room despite telling this person no several times. After this, Doryan tried to pin the initiation on her, she called him out, and while she didn't have the whole conversation because Doryan had deleted his account, after a very similar incident meaning that this kind of behavior is a repeat for Doryan, and the blame then shifted to how dare you berate Doryan. He's a lonely boy, you wouldn't want us have to hurt you too. They then brought this whole ordeal into the public light to try and force Ceci to yield. However, they lied about the publicity of this event to make it seem like previously it was public despite evidence to the contrary. Nor did Ceci ever refer to what Doryan did as a type of assault. And you can understand why Ceci would be mad that people would be speaking to her and putting words in her mouth too, and she attempted to move on. But that was much easier said than done. Much of what Ceci brings up in the document also reaffirms what I brought up previously in the video, including the culture surrounding Emi where people were not allowed to give any negative criticism of her, and what's shown here goes very deep, where she would organize operations against her critics, including Zealous Fox, Off, Ceci herself, and her husband. In fact, Emi specifically befriended or made anonymous accounts specifically so they could harass people online. One of the accounts Ceci shows is this account called Speed Supersonic, and shows several screenshots which showed this account going after several people, going so far as to accuse them of liking cheese pizza and stalking Emi's account. Even after attacking another account defending one of their friends that Emi was harassing. In fact, Emi Jones was specifically going after Zealous Fox for shipping Sonic and Tails. This is ironic given that Emi Jones also supports Sonic and Tails, even going so far as to say that she sees herself as Tails in her relationship with Ryan. Emi also used Ceci drawing PRN images specifically so that they could paint her as a predator, even though Emi herself had commissioned these drawings from Ceci at the time. Emi also did not tell this person to stop, so they continued to harass Ceci for about as long as 2 months after Emi had made her statement. And eventually Ceci DM'd Trey Nobles telling them to tell her fans to stop harassing her, which they did. However, their fans continued to go after Ceci even after this. It is also worth mentioning that Emi doesn't believe any of the accusations she has spewed out at any of these people. In fact, much like Zealous Fox, she thinks that the age thing is stupid because as long as the characters are aged up, it doesn't matter to her whether these characters are stripped together or not, but she still kept going after him. And keep in mind, Ceci never once does anything to Emi out of malice, even after putting ibuprofen in her drink. Ceci did that because Emi was sick and wouldn't take any help despite her condition, and Cec merely wanted to help. Even when Ceci is helping Emi go after Zealous Fox, she's doing this because she's trying to help Emi. Never once does she defend Zealous Fox or Off, or any of the people that Emi was going after mentioned in this document. And Ceci even makes it very clear she still supported Sonic and Tails R despite Doryan because she sees Emi as a friend and as somebody that she can relate to. Emi never returns the favor. Anytime Ceci brought up her trauma, it was made into some sort of spectacle on top of that because of how Emi treated the people that crossed her. Ceci was afraid of similar retribution if she got on Emi's bad side. In fact, this made Ceci feel like Emi was taking advantage of their relationship, even if Ceci legitimately did care about her, just because she wasn't allowed to put her feelings first when she always put Emi first. Sonic Fan Jam 2022 eventually came around. However, at first, Ceci had no interest in attending, but as her friends were talking about going, and after talking about it with her husband, Ceci decided to go to Sonic Fan Jam and ask if there was an artist table available. However, unbeknownst to Ceci, Doryan was to make an appearance at Sonic and Tails R's panel, despite having a falling out with staff previously. And Ceci wouldn't have known about any of this from Sonic and Tails' our promotional material since she had Doryan and his name muted. She did this so she could browse Twitter without having to think about what happened back in 2017. At first, Ceci went to confirm this with Emi, who simply offered to tell him to stay away from her. Even after this, though, Ceci was still worried, so she talked with her husband and even considered canceling her trip at one point. However, she valued Emi's friendship more than her fear of Doryan. At one point, Ceci's husband even wrote a letter to the staff, hoping to sort things out. Ceci, however, insisted that he delete his message before he convinced her to talk with staff herself, which she did. Ceci eventually got in a call with Corey and Patrick, and they discussed how they could keep Doryan away from Ceci so they could both come to the event. They did not, however, inform Ceci that she and Doryan would not be in the same room together, which would have fixed the situation before it even became a headache. That being said, they explained that they were still cool with Doryan, which made Ceci a bit uncomfortable. Ceci's husband did join the call in an agitated state and gave them his firm opinion on the matter before Ceci continued. She explained further that after a very public bout of drama, she was more worried about dragging her friends into drama unjustly and being canceled by a Twitter mob. Now, despite all of this, Ceci never escalated anything. The most she did was when she was worried about the staff being friends with Doryan. However, Ceci also understood that it wasn't her business who they were friends with, and both parties let it go. In the end, Doryan decided not to attend in public, but rather he was going to make an appearance virtually, which didn't seem to bother Ceci. So Ceci messaged Emi to make sure that everything was okay and check up on her. Emi didn't respond back, however. So Ceci spent the rest of her day helping her husband out in his job search. Emi responds an hour later making several claims, including that Ceci was trying to get Doryan banned, that she didn't know how important Doryan was to the panel, and that she was going to ruin the event for everyone attending, who had put hours of work and money into the panel, and that Ceci did at no point ever tell her how she felt about Doryan. And if you've been paying attention, you'll know very well that these claims are verifiably false. Ceci did try to work out a compromise so Doryan and her could both attend while not making things harder for anyone there. Doryan did not come to the panel, but he wasn't banned. He forfeited on his own account. And despite all of this, Ceci still cares deeply about Emi. She still put Emi first because she was concerned about Emi's health. She was concerned she might inconvenience Emi, and yet Emi is telling her just how inconsiderate she is. Ceci is, of course, trying to be as polite as she can be, but eventually she does tell Emi this is just her victim shaming her, but Emi refuses to hear her out. Emi tries to force Ceci into a call with her and Doryan, but Ceci refuses, saying that she would be too anxious to do so. And in the end, Emi doesn't believe Ceci at all and continued to blame her for ruining the panel, even though it wasn't her fault. And Ceci felt bad just for speaking up. She attempted to contact both Emi and Trey several times to apologize and see if there was anything she could do to help, but in the end, the panel was ultimately cancelled. Though Ceci had nothing to do with that, and there was really no way that she could have known Doryan was that important to Emi or the panel. And again, Ceci felt very bad about what happened, and tried to message Emi and Trey to apologize about what just happened. Emi didn't respond, Trey did, and Ceci reiterates much of what she said to Emi. However, there's a point where Ceci felt like she was just being gaslit and cut the conversation, hoping this didn't escalate any further. Trey came out and tried to make a rather unfair comparison where somebody accused him of the grape, and that's what Ceci is doing to Doryan. Here's the thing, Ceci never accused Doryan of the grape. She didn't even accuse him of inappropriate assault. Nor did she consider this a fair comparison. Because what happened between Trey and this person was consensual, where in Ceci's case, Doryan put something up against her without her consent and her being half asleep. So she reiterates to Trey that the two incidents are nothing alike. Trey then tells her that because she was half asleep and forgot this, that her whole story is full of inconsistencies. So Ceci asks him where the other inconsistencies are coming from, and Trey gives her no answer, and just says that one or more inconsistency means that the whole story is inconsistent. And just to add on to this, he tells her that because these memories only come up because of trauma, that Ceci doesn't understand what a repressed memory is. Trey then tries to tell her that her feelings about Doryan are only because of her being essayed by another person on the same night. Trey also stated that Doryan thought she was awake, even though Doryan admitted she was asleep, and that Doryan kissing Ceci was just platonic, even though it wasn't. And at this point, Ceci took this as her being gaslit, and Trey continues to try and argue the same points. But eventually, Ceci got fed up with him and told him that his personal idea of what happened is irrelevant, but Trey continues trying to argue these same points over and over and over again, and Ceci, by now, is getting very tired of this. Then, Trey tries to bring up the point that Emi was kissed by Doryan, but Ceci reiterates to him that the whole incident only made her feel more used because of what happened and in what context. Again, she doesn't care if Doryan is at the same panel, she just doesn't want him anywhere near her. And Doryan is now dragging the narrative that Emi had come up with, even though by this point, Doryan is not saying that he was banned. And Trey is still trying to force her to admit to something that she didn't do, even though Doryan himself is saying the same thing by this point. But now, Trey asks Doryan about the kiss, and the two try to recontextualize it into something more innocent when it clearly wasn't. And at this point, Doryan is now lying about the event to try and save himself. And to back this up, Ceci shews a document which proved that Doryan was attracted to her, but Trey continues to reiterate his points over and over and over again, until Ceci had to end the conversation, which they did on good terms. Before conversing with Trey, Patrick came to ask Ceci if she was alright, before asking to call. In retrospective, Ceci says this was a bit suspect. Nonetheless, they do call. Patrick wanted to call because apparently he had gotten it into his head that Ceci was trying to get Doryan banned, and so he sent her an email saying that she was banned from attending at all. However, this email ended up in her spam folder, so there was no way she would have gotten it. But they leave it at that, and Ceci accepts his apology. He even gives her a table at the event as compensation. Here's the thing. After Trey and Emi made this drama public, Patrick turned around and claimed Ceci was blackmailing him after he claimed the whole ordeal was a mistake on his end. In her statement, Emi continued to claim that Ceci accused Doryan of SA, and that she was trying to get him banned from the convention. The problem is that the SA claim only came after Alex, because he felt strongly about the situation and was only trying to defend Ceci. Again, Ceci never claimed Doryan did SA her, nor did she attempt to blackmail anybody. That last claim was made up by Patrick himself. Ceci does say in retrospective that she probably should have been in the call by herself because Alex was very protective of her. She doesn't feel like she was in the right mind space at the time. Granted, she does understand why Alex is very protective of her. Another thing of note is that Ceci does feel if Emi was in this situation, they would have taken it much more seriously. And indeed, Emi has been in situations like this, and they have taken them way more seriously. And besides the other points the staff made against Ceci, they also began making the claim that Ceci was threatening to expose them, which is simply not true either. Another point was that Emi started blaming Ceci for her ED, or eating disorder, and health, which comes from an incident where Emi refused sunscreen and ended up ruining a fever. She refused to take any water during this point, and eventually I repeat, they decided to give her an Advil to power through this. All Ceci did was support her when she was suffering her eating disorder. Of course, Emi never told her how she felt about it until years later, which was a peeve of Ceci's. In fact, supposedly Emi understood why they did this, but later made the complaint that it was affecting her OCD, and that she had a peanut allergy, which she made a big deal about. In fact, Emi made a point to refer to it as drugging, but as Ceci puts it, the connotation implies putting something harmful in her drink, which they simply didn't do. And in Emi's response, for some reason she decided to bring up the problems that Ceci and her husband had years later when he cheated on her. The thing is, this had nothing to do with anything. Anything at all. And they had the audacity to claim that it was for transparency, when they really didn't need to bring it up at all. And here's the thing, Ceci wanted that whole ordeal to remain private because it was over. And then Emi's going around telling Ceci to take accountability for her actions she had no part in. And Emi will make the false equivalence claim that Ceci had no business talking about the situation between her and Doryan, when that was a key reason as to why she cut ties with Doryan. That's why it was brought up during the Hunted P situation. And this brings me to the aftermath, and why Ceci was so hesitant to release this in the first place, and what happened after Emi had released her response. What had stopped Ceci from initially releasing this document was Emi's heart condition, which Emi was talking about relentlessly. Ceci was actually worried that she could put Emi's life at risk. And at the end of the day, there is a reason why Ceci felt that she'd been backed into her corner and really had no choice but to talk about all of this. Because Emi, Doryan, Trey, and all of their friends were relentlessly harassing Ceci and her husband. They were trying to get her husband fired from his job. That's how far they were willing to take this. And Ceci had backed off during this whole ordeal because when she gets stressed, it causes her a lot of chronic and mental pain. She tried to resolve things privately, but to no avail. And for the first week, she felt like she couldn't even sleep or eat. Then Emi pulls back up the heart condition, specifically to say that because her issues were worse, somehow that meant that Ceci was incapable of criticizing her, which is ludicrous. And as Ceci points out, this really should not be a competition of who's suffering more. This is a serious issue. Because a lot of these problems are problems that Ceci herself was also suffering with. But instead, Emi's fans took it to a whole nother level. Like I said, they tried to get her husband fired. They relentlessly harassed her, shamed her, body shamed her. Just anything you can think of, they were just going at her relentlessly. They were even block evading her specifically so they could continuously go after her. Even after taking a break, they came back relentlessly to harass her. It would not stop. And here's the thing, Ceci and her husband were out of jobs. And her husband now had allegations against him because of Emi's response. And after all of this, after watching her husband's mental health decline for so long, Ceci had decided to end it all to stop burdening him. She felt like if it wasn't for her, none of this would have happened. He literally had to stop her, and he spent the rest of the night taking care of her. Ceci had her friends and family to back her up during all of this. They were praying for her and they took care of her during all of this. This is why Ceci felt she was back into a corner. At that point, nobody had gone out of their way to defend Ceci. Nobody had any sympathy for Ceci. Emi and her friends knew full well what was happening. They liked every tweet that was going after her. They even retweeted and reiterated all of the awful things that they were saying to Ceci. And they spent all of that time spreading as much misinformation as they could against Ceci. This is something that Ceci would never do to Emi. But yet, all the people Ceci thought were once friends were perfectly willing to ruin her life. And after she had released her document, Coop made a response video trying to go after her. On top of that, GamerGuide7 Aces got involved and decided that he was going to add fuel to the fire himself. And the screenshot was put up as clear as day. It was at that point that Emi Jones finally decided to defend Ceci. But the sad thing is that this never should have gotten to this point. By this point, however, Emi and Ceci have long since made up. However, in that time, Emi Jones hasn't learned anything. She is still holding these fundraisers, she is in a terrible financial situation, she's still going after Zealous Fox, and in a vague attempt to repair her own image, she has now decided to go on a full-blown crusade against Sontail shippers, even though she herself is an admitted Sontail shipper. And despite harassing their customers, Emi Jones is still given special treatment by Sega. The problem is that because she's only wanted for her looks, and because she's been couch casting, there's going to come a point where eventually she's not going to have her looks to back her up, and when that happens, she's going to be out of a job. And in the end, Emi Jones has nobody to blame but herself. There are so many instances where she could very easily have kept all this on the down low. She could very easily have avoided a lot of the conflicts she kept getting into, and she could very easily have avoided her financial situation. But because of how she's handled every situation that she's been in, she's only made it worse and has only fueled the fire even further. So at this point, I think I can safely say that we need to leave it at that. There's nothing else that can be said, and anything else is just a repeat of the same thing over and over and over again. If Emi Jones doesn't go broke, she might go to another fandom and do the same thing if she gets kicked out of the Sonic fandom. And really, that's what the story just comes down to. Going into a fandom, trying to get popular, getting exposed, and then running from the fandom before going to another fandom and starting all over again. So in layman's terms, she's really nothing more than a liability that's bound to cause more problems than anything else. And now that I've essentially lifted this burden from my shoulders, I can at least say that I hope that the people who are watching this have learned something. And Emi Jones, if you are watching this and you've gotten this far into the video, I do hope you clean up your act, and I do hope you get your life back together. Because really, that's the best that we can hope for.
Spreman si da nikad ne saznaš ko sam ja zaista. Nije više uopšte važno ko si ti. Tako je. Nije važno ko sam ja. Već ko si ti? Za nas dvojicu. Rat je gotov.